Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's time for the next video in my series covering the new Cards expansion, Blood and Iron, which is coming at the end of November. It's the end of October right now, and we've just gotten into the releases and kind of articles talking about stuff, and the next thing that we have on the horizon is we have the rotation list. So, first of all, I'm a Cards content creator, member of the Cards contributor program, fairly active content creator, particularly for newer players. I've done some bits and pieces all over the place. Some of you probably know me, those of you who don't, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff, you know the deal. There's also a link down there if you're able to, buy me a coffee to, help support the channel. And we are continuing to just go through everything that we are finding out about the new expansion as it goes. So what we're going to find out right now is what's happening with rotation. So first of all, what is rotation and how does it work? So Cards, every time they do like a major expansion, 1939, the designers will rotate out some cards. They go into the reserve pool. They're not removed from the game permanently. They can come back, and we'll see that in a minute. And some cards will rotate back in again. And this happens to keep refreshing the pool and to change up the meta to make sure that things are kind of going the way they want them to go. So let's have a look and see what we've actually got. Alright, so here we are. This is the introduction. As usual, I'll kind of have a quick pass through it and let you know anything we need to look at. But basically, key highlights: 107 cards rotating out, roughly the same number from each major nation, though rarity and distribution isn't always the same. Yeah, we kind of get it. 20 cards are coming back. That's on top of the 87 cards that are coming with the new expansion, so we'll have a even pool. And they are designed to align themselves with the themes explored in the new expansion, which of course makes perfect sense. Overarching themes on reserved cards. One of the things here is that we see the end of Pincer, so all Pincer cards are now out of the pool. So Pincer is a mechanic where when you deploy a unit, you select another unit, as long as both units are alive, both units gain a benefit based on the Pincer. Pincer mechanic is therefore gone. There are none there. And I think they talk here about rotating out whole mechanics, something we're starting to employ more heavily to keep the complexity of the game low for new players. I think there are other reasons for that as well. Pincer can get very high rolly, but I actually don't mind seeing Pincer go out, and we'll talk about that when we see the cards leaving. It doesn't mean these mechanics are necessarily gone for good. Yep, again, things are returning, but they do say they're most likely not going to return unless they're going to explore the mechanic in a new way. Mobilise cards are also going. Mobilise is another card. Basically, this is to let people know in advance that Mobilise is being phased out. Expect that over the next couple of rotations, or the next rotation plus this one, to see Mobilise removed from the game entirely. Mobilise is, again, a mechanic where if a unit remains on the board and it hasn't suffered damage, it gets +1/+1/+1 every turn and just keeps growing. Again, it's never been that strong, but I'm guessing there are good reasons. So we now kind of see that, like, enough of the kind of basics. They sum up by saying they're trying to heavily rework returning cards from the reserve pool, rather than reworking them when they're active, which actually makes sense. Rotate and bring them back. So let's see what we have by nation. Alright, so this is the British rotation as in leaving list. These are the cards being rotated out of the game. I kind of don't want to talk about like everything in a great deal of detail because this video would get unmanageably long. Big things to note from this: Spitfire continues to kind of just disappear. We're losing Committed Crew and RAF Ground Crew, which are both Spitfire synergy cards, but it's not been that workable for a while. ATS is gone, which is interesting to me. There are some big hits. The 2 para C going does hit a couple of decks quite hard. Exile Air is 1. Brit Air also likes 2 para C. Sea Patrol, really key to Exile Air and to some other decks. Secret Operations is gone, so it's a countermeasure that did see a little bit of play. Double Strength is gone. I think we'll see more and more the logic behind this grows. I mean, it's very clear that trying to avoid super order heavy kind of methodology is something that 1939 are working on, and Double Strength is definitely all about that. RAF Buffalo's gone. First Airborne. I'm just looking to see if there's anything here that I really want to call out. Let's call out AA Barrage, because AA Barrage is relevant for a very particular reason. So AA Barrage is gone because Britain is getting some pin support, and AA Barrage plus Suisei, which is Japan fighter, was a very powerful multi-pin combination. Minor spoilers, Japan might also be sad and losing some pin. Grounded is also gone. It's another pin card gone, but then that's because we will see, as discussed in my previous video, that they are putting a minor focus on pin for Britain. Other than that, I mean, this is a pretty standard rotation list. There's nothing here that I think is gonna end the world. There aren't a lot of cards here that are seeing, that I'm aware of, vast amounts of play beyond those that I've called out. The rest are just kind of tidy-ups, like some of the artillery that isn't really seeing play, that kind of, I think, needs to go away and see a rework. An Unexpected Resistance, which is a countermeasure, which again was very useful for a couple of decks, but kind of niche. Again, Exile Air, though, has suffered very badly under this. Those of you who kind of follow my streams will know I play a fair bit of Exile Air. It's been pretty gutted. Despite not losing any of its aircraft, it's lost some of its major tools. First card that's coming back is Dowding System. Now, Dowding System is an interesting countermeasure, because it's one of the few, so outside of Ultra, Dowding System is one of the few orders that directly cancels enemy orders. This is a very strong countermeasure if you're playing into order decks, if you know how to use it. I don't know whether Dowding System is going to see a huge amount of play, but it might. It very much depends on whether there's anything worth countering with it. That really is the big thing with Dowding System, is if there are some big hit orders, then throwing a Dowding System or two into your deck to support your Ultra if you're Brit, or to give you access to like a mini Ultra if you're not Brit, could be huge. I'm not overly worried. I think seeing it come back it kind of makes sense. It's a counter to orders, and we know that that's something that has been a focus for 1939 at the minute, is trying to slow down the sheer power of order decks. So, no great shock, Dowding System's back. A card that may shock people returning is this. This is Monty. Now, Monty was cracked. Spoilers, Monty is still cracked. So, Monty went away because it was an absolute terror, pinning all enemy units, and as long as you got at least 3 of them, which you always did, drawing a card for 1 cost is insanely strong. The new version, the rework, and I have said multiple times, I'm on record multiple times saying if Monty comes back, it's going to come back with a rework, and it turns out I was right. It does come back with a rework. The rework on Monty is kind of similar to the rework we saw on the B-24J bomber, the token bomber that can spawn from US cards, which is that instead of having a big board-wide effect, it now has an effect on a target unit and adjacent unit, so it's a little more targeted. However, you still, for 1 credit, if you know what you're doing, pin 3 critical enemy units and draw a card, buying yourself a turn. This is not a minor thing. This card is cracked. This card is going to see play. This card is going to have people spitting bricks. That's just the way it goes. I'm actually not that sad to see Monty back. I have fond memories of Monty. Monty was one of the first elite orders that I randomly pulled out of a pack in this game, and I happened to be playing Brit US Air when I first joined this game, and Monty was a major part of me being able to get to Field Marshal on my first run, the run that kind of, I guess, made me noticeable here and got me started into things. Anyway, point is that Monty's back. Monty is marginally less cracked than he used to be, but that's not to say that Monty is not still insane. This card is still unbelievably strong. Alright, number 3, Commando. I kind of love that this is back, because I kind of love the moxie of the design of this card. Headline, I don't think it's going to see a huge amount of play, because it's quite situational, but there might be some use cases for it. The big change, as you can see on the screen, it's literally the same card comes back. It's still a unit that you deploy that really is just a distinctly average body. But it's been buffed. It's been buffed so that now any units, and this is the reason that this is going to be niche, this is units with 4 or more cannot attack. That includes your own units. So, I mean, there are places where this could be useful. You might throw this in a Commandos deck if Commandos makes a comeback, but in the current meta that's highly unlikely, because Commandos has been absolutely gutted by the existence of a lot of counter to orders. This might be quite good, actually. For the most part, however, it's back. Someone will probably try it. I will probably be on the list of someones that try this, but I don't expect it to make a massive impact. I really don't. Alright, to Germany, and prepare yourselves, Germany players, because while I picked out a couple of cards from the Brit rotation list and went, these have some impact on some decks. The Germany choices, there are a few cards here that are going to be notable losses. Autocannon is gone. Heinkel is gone. The MABF 109G is gone. Gebirgspioneer is gone. List Regiment is gone. The 989 is gone. 101 Infantry is gone. These are all cards which did see play. Other cards here saw some play, but those are all cards that did see significant play in different deck archetypes. Germany is still very strong. This has not removed any of the super impressive German tools, but it's removed some of the more ubiquitous ones. I'm sad to see Heinkel go. Heinkel is one of those cards which I've always recommended as being good value. Especially early in the game. Having a bomber that can help you access your deck is, while dealing damage is good. The autocannon, we all know autocannon. It's got a great effect if you can keep deploying units. It's basically a must-answer card. Protect the Pocket going. Now there's an interesting one, a card that was there and just didn't work, basically. I've tried to make Protect the Pocket work many times. It doesn't. The other cards are kind of predictable. Eagle Day is gone, Ride of the Valkyries is gone, so some of the OTK shenanigans that those might have supported are gone. 87 Grenadier is gone, however, which is interesting, given the refocus on countermeasures that came with covert operations. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. 87 Grenadier wasn't seeing a lot of play. I personally think that is a sign that 87 Grenadier may come back next time round with some changes. 101 Infantry is gone, and none of us are sad to see this go. It's part of the Pincer, and it was part of Pincer High Roll. It got very, very silly. Propaganda going. Now, Propaganda going is an interesting choice. Not that it saw a lot of play, but it does remove a counterplay to countermeasures that dealt direct damage to HQ, which I can understand removing. Scatter Tactics is gone. That actually started to see a little bit of play. But realistically, particularly in countermeasures decks, obviously. But yeah, I mean, we've seen quite a few significant cards disappear. What are we getting back for Germany? Well, Wirbelwind is back. And this card is still cracked. Okay. Wirbelwind is a great card. Wirbelwind was an absolute staple in frontline forever because it had blitz, and while it was in the front line, your enemy air units were pinned. This is going to be a terror for air decks. It's a card you have to answer. It's not egregiously broken, but it's strong, and it's interesting to see it coming back. It's a decent body for its cost and has blitz. The fact that you can put this in the front line on turn 4 can be crippling to air decks. Okay, Rally is coming back. So Rally's an interesting one to come back because Rally has, hypothetically, a very strong effect if you get it on a wide enough board. It's kind of like a baby Blitzkrieg in that your units get +1 attack for the turn. You get to draw a card and you can remove pin. This is decent value for 2. Now, how heavily it will see play will depend on the archetypes that we see in-game. But this is good value, and actually is probably not a bad card at all for newer players to make use of, because it's a good effect, it can counter pin, it gets you card draw, so it cantrips itself. Cantripping, Magic the Gathering terminology again, it replaces itself when you play it. So you play this for 2, you get another card in hand, so you've not lost the card. So it's only the 2 credits to play it, and you get the effect. I would not be surprised to see this see a little bit of play at lower rank. I don't know whether we'll see it top tier decks. We might do. It really depends on how people feel it would perform in comparison to its bigger, angrier brother. A card that is going to see play, a lot of play, is Fast Heinz. Fast Heinz is back. Fast Heinz is still utterly cracked. Fast Heinz is bonkers, even for an elite. Fast Heinz is bonkers. Genuinely, global buffs like this, for 1 credit, it's so good. I'm not going to talk about it excessively, just the tank focus is here. We've heard that Blood and Iron is going to be tank focused. Expect to see Fast Heinz quite a bit, and expect to be sad every time you see it. Last up, we have a tank that's coming back. This is the Panzer IIc. This is coming back with quite a rework. So the new text is interesting because it buffs your veteran. So any unit that becomes veteran gets a buff to attack and defense. It gets +2 attack, +1 defense. On a 1-cost, 1/3 body, that's not bad. If you are going to go in the veteran direction, this is a card you really want to look at. This is going to... they note here that one of the themes of new expansion is to explore veteran mechanic more, so I'm fascinated to see what else we get. If that is the case, this is definitely a good way of opening up, as they say, a payoff card for this. This could be very, very strong. Timed correctly, this can be a very cheap global buff. Even a single instance where you're able to time this so that it's alive when your 7 Schutzen promotes to a 5/5 and instead promotes to a 7/6. This could be very, very strong. I'm fascinated to see whether this does actually open up a whole new archetype. But that's pretty cool. To the motherland, we arrive at the Soviet Union and the rotations, and let's get the headline out of the way before we do anything else. Great Patriotic War is gone. So long, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. It does not surprise me. It surprises me that push didn't go with it. This removes the Soviet ability to snap down HQ defense, and I understand why. If you look at my previous video and you see the card that allows T-34s to deal overrun damage, and have played any game in which overrun is a mechanic that you can find a way to exploit, you will understand why this would need to rotate. Also, it's nice that it lowers the OTK. It doesn't remove the OTKs, though. Push OTK isn't going to go anywhere, it's just going to be a different variant, because it doesn't need great patriotic waterwork anyway, it's just a way of accelerating it, or doing it a different way. Road to Berlin's gone, 5-year plan's gone, close combat, 503rd motors gone. That's the death knell, the last ancestral call as well. Like, we are seeing the ultimate death knell in tokens. What little was left of the playability of the tokens deck is now gone. Patriotic Firestorm's gone. That's kind of sad for Soviet air-based decks and decks that liked having any form of Soviet support line aggro. Bryansk Irregulars is gone, which honestly I think is mostly a case of it needs to go because it was just too played. It was basically a card that you just throw in on principle. Obviously, things like Astrakhans are going to go because of its pinning thing. The Mighty Fall going. This may make people wonder because you didn't see a lot of play, but if the veteran mechanic is about to be strongly explored, having a limited card that is direct veteran removal might not help. But yeah, I mean, the Soviets take a bit of a hit here, but to very specific decks. Okay, so, cards that are returning for the Soviets. Siberian Transfer is back. So, Siberian Transfer has been used in the past to try and pull off some very, very impressive kind of big hits and OTKs. It can be done because the 1942 is a big body. It's a 5.5 tank with Blitz. It does have 2 op cost, so it's not cheap, but if you can find a way to buff it, it's pretty cool. Or if you can do something else with it to take advantage of it. So Siberian Transfer's back. I imagine there are plenty of people who are going to be cooking with this. It's unchanged, so we're just going to have to see where it goes from when it comes back. Zhukov. So again, we're seeing the return of another of the general cards. Zhukov is kind of okay. It really depends on what you hit with it, which makes it potentially a bit hit and miss. If this hits the right kind of Soviet infantry that you've somehow baked your deck around, then it could be really, really strong, but the problem is, of course, it's an elite, and for me, it feels a little weak for an elite unless you build a deck that contains like one super infantry card that is somehow going to instantly win you the game and nothing else, which seems like fairly poor design given that you're expecting to then also need to find the one elite card in your deck to trigger the thing that lets you do your thing with it. So Zhukov's back. I don't expect it to make massive waves. Mobile defense is back. This gives Soviets a kind of a quick answer, like the T-70s, obviously, are just guard tanks that you're gonna pop. You get a couple of them, so it's good value. But obviously they get destroyed. It gives a defensive option. I don't know whether it'll see a lot of play, but it's an interesting one to have back. 214th Amur. Now this is not a shock to see back, given that we have the T-34 synergy that we are talking about. This card, of course, is going to be critical to this. This is a great buff for your T-34s. Heavy armor and lowered operation cost on tanks. This is never a bad thing. I would expect, again, if the T-34 synergy goes the way you expect it to, expect to see this card see a lot of play. Expect many T-34 focused Soviet decks experimenting, and almost all of them are going to run this card. In fact, I'd go as far as to say all of them are going to run this card, at least the good ones, because heavy armor and lowered operation cost is not nothing. Alright, let's talk about Sam. So, Uncle Sam, we have arrived at the USA. So let's take a look at that which is leaving us. There are quite a few cards here that will be notable to various people for various reasons. Skytrain is gone. Not a huge shock, given that Skytrain's pool of targets was becoming less and less great, and frankly, it was, when it was commonly played, ridiculous value. Island hopping's gone. It's interesting to note that several of the HQ affecting cards are going. I'm wondering if this will emerge to be something that is being played with in a different way in the new expansion, so we'll wait and see. Quartermasters is gone, which I don't mind at all. It was a very kind of occasionally used in ramp. I'm not going to go through all of them. Big ones to note, the 99th Infantry Battalion is gone. Now this is, again, along with Skytrain, a formerly staple of frontline decks, and unlike Skytrain, this had not petered off at all. It was being played incredibly regularly in a huge number of decks, because it's an incredibly good value card. So its loss is going to impact the US substantially. It's going to impact a lot of decks because it is pretty much a solid include in almost... I mean, it's basically an auto-include in any US deck that cares about value on the front line. What do we got? ASW Patrol is gone. This removes some strong removal that we're seeing a lot of play in ramp decks. And since they now have Firebomb, they don't need it. What else have we got? Half Track is gone. This is yet another staple for frontline decks. It had fallen a bit out of favour, but I still think was an incredibly strong card. I ran it very regularly in my frontline decks. I'm sad to see it go. We've got not a lot else that I'm going to leap into, although the 30th Regiment going will affect draft goblins. Those of you who play a lot of draft, 30th Regiment was a card you never minded seeing because it was decent value in draft. We've also got Awoken Giant, which is removal that was seeing some play too. So these are the things that are going from the US. And let's take a look at what is coming back. So, in keeping with the themes that we have seen, with the, I suppose what you'd call the signature figure or generals coming back, Paton is returning. Now, Paton is potentially incredibly strong because it can give you a huge swing turn. So that reduction in deployment cost and the addition of Blitz in the right deck, that is to say if you have a deck that needs that extra acceleration, could be huge. And we all know that US has been heading into methods of strengthening credits or credit acceleration, or I suppose some people call it credit cheating. I don't like credit cheating, credit acceleration. I think I've had some conversations about this. Big thank you to And Yet It Moves, by the way, for having a really interesting conversation / debate with me about learning to lose the Western term that we use because it gives bad connotations. But credit acceleration is a big thing at the minute, and Paton is going to play into that. So I would expect to see this card see quite a lot of experimental play. It is a very strong elite card in any deck that can benefit from a quick burst. Okay, so next up we have the M4A3R3 Zippo. I'm so happy to see this card back. Not because I think this card is amazing or strong or good, but because I just love this card. I love the Zippo. I think it is a very iconic vehicle from the war, and I think it's extremely cool to see it back. I also think it has a stunning piece of artwork. The card itself is probably not going to be a huge mainstay because its operation cost does work against it. It is a fantastic answer to Infantry Guards, and has just enough defence to be a useful body, but the operation cost is always going to be the big downside with the Zippo. Still, it's interesting to see it back, and I imagine it will get some experimentation, and honestly, if I can find a slot for it in decks that I'm playing for fun, I'm probably going to want to put it in just because I like the card, and I think it's cool. Next up, we get the M4A1. Right, so the M4A1 is back. This is a big, giant special attack that can't be targeted by enemy orders, and randomly, if your enemy causes you to discard this card, gets drawn into your hand. Honestly, this isn't a great card. I don't expect to see a lot of this seeing play. Its operation cost sits against it. It's a good body for the cost, but its operation cost is bad. That said, it does have the advantage that it can cantrip into your hand as a response to... Sorry, not cantrip. It can tutor into your hand as a response to something your opponent does, but that isn't always necessarily a good thing, because you could end up overdrawing. Just something to be aware of. I don't expect to see this seeing a huge amount of play. However, it is noteworthy that all of the Shermans coming back are all about the focus on Sherman tanks. So many of these cards may become vastly, vastly more valuable and playable simply because we're going to get a bunch of stuff that buff Shermans, which I think is very, very cool. So that's going to be interesting. So depending on what the things are, I will be interested to see where it goes. Finally, we have another returning M4. This M4 is returning with a change, so it's coming out of rotation. This is the M4A2, which is, in theory, a very good value card. So the deployment on it, that effectively means that when you deploy it, you get a second copy. So in effect, you pay the cost and you get 2 of these. But as a 6-drop, as they note here, it was a bit clunky. As a 5-drop, it's a slot that is less contended, and it is, even at 2 op cost, good value. Now, if we see some Sherman support that reduces op cost, this could start to get even more interesting. Just a thought, I am not in IT, so I have not seen those cards. But if we see any Sherman support that's good for reducing op cost, like globally on Shermans, this, like similar to Blitz Doctrine, that would be insane, because you would start to see much more value on these. Anyway, I'm hypothesizing here. I don't know anything, but I think it'd be interesting if we saw the Sherman equivalent of Blitz Doctrine or something similar, with a cascading effect that specifically targets your Shermans, your M4s. But that's the US. That's the stuff that they're getting back. And, as I say, some fairly significant rotations. Okay, so next up on Bear's rotational world tour, we have Japan. And we actually have a lot to talk about in the rotations. This might be the longest of the rotation sections. I'm not keeping track, but it may well turn out being. So Japan is having quite a few noteworthy cards rotated out. Right at the top, the first card we see is Shiden is going. Now, for those who don't know, Shiden has been a mainstay elite in Japan aggro decks forever and a day. Because when you're playing an aggro deck and you get your opponent down to low defense and then they somehow manage to push you back off the front line or keep you from getting that last hit, a lot of the time in Japan aggro, you know that you can just keep drawing because eventually you're going to hit Shiden or you're going to hit Bombing Raid, things that will let you directly target the HQ in one way or another. Shiden obviously doesn't directly target, but it has Ambush, Blitz and Fury, so hypothetically this is an 11 cost 8 damage to HQ card. Plus, it gets played in combo decks that use things like Bolster or other things to make it even more damaging. So it is a significant loss. It's effectively it will reduce the instant finisher in Japan aggro, although it has endlessly been easily replaced / subbed with the Hien, which is still around. So imagine that that's probably not going to change much. It just means there'll be slightly less of an instant punch. But I mentioned Bombing Raid. Bombing Raid is also going. After the return of Desperate Measures, I'm not immensely surprised to see Bombing Raid being rotated, because Japan was ending up with us, particularly Japan aggro decks, were ending up with a lot of incredibly strong removal cards. Bombing Raid going with Desperate Measures coming back just makes sense. Rule the Skies did see some play in OTK decks, but we won't linger on it. We're not going to worry about Duty as a Mountain. We are going to stop over the Key 100 Goshi Kisen. This card saw a brief heyday, particularly in the build-up to an OCC, in which this was a strong answer to various bomber threats, because on your turn, and various guards for that matter, it was really good for removing guards. It was an answer to a number of issues that were on the board. In particular, it answered the Glamour Boys incredibly well, because it has exactly the right amount of damage to delete them, and it is immune to damage on your turn. So it's gone. Scouting Party is gone. Now this is interesting, because Scouting Party going is more of a hit to some niche decks than it is necessarily to the big Japan decks. I mean, it did see play, but Scouting Party in particular was very favoured in any self-damage deck, because it drops the 33rd Recon, and the 33rd Recon are the infantry bodies that every time they take damage draw you a card. So self-damage could use them for card draw. That's interestingly, side note, this is going to affect your Soviet Japan self-damage, unless we see some other support, which we might do. Honourable Death, I mean, this falls into the same category as Bombing Raid. I'm unsurprised to see it removed, purely and entirely because we have Commit the Reserves, and you don't need both. What else have we got? That we got Dawn Operations. That's going to make many OTK players sad. Utsunomiya Regiment. Now, Utsunomiya Regiment going is directly connected, I have no doubt, to the arrival of Shibata. Go check my channel for my video on Shibata and what Shibata's doing and my expectations of it. But basically, this is just an incredibly expensive version of Shibata, and it needs a rework, or Shibata needs a rework. The two of them can't really exist in the same, as it were, I guess, part of the multiverse. They are very contradictory. Great Purpose, this is, didn't see a lot of play. Island Defense did. Again, this is a big blow if you are a lover of having the backup in a Soviet Japan self-damage deck, although I have some thoughts on ways to get around that, but we'll talk about that if I ever do some deck techs. But it is a card that is gone, and noteworthy that, it was basically very expensive card draw, unless you had 10 or less HQ defense, and then it had value. Speaking of value, the D4Y Suisei. Now, the Suisei was insane, because the Suisei's pin deployment effect could pin 3 units. And if you were a big fan of pin, you may remember that earlier on I mentioned that AA Barrage had gone from Brit. It was a great combo with Suisei, because you would play Suisei, pin 3 units, AA Barrage your own Suisei back into hand, so you got the pin back again next turn. Has gone. Experimental Flight is gone. Bit of a hit for discards. I know it did see some play in self-discard. And then a few other cards, but I'm not going to go through them all. So, Japan's seen Some pretty solid changes, but a lot of them are kind of swaps, which is something to be aware of. In particular, Bombing Raid and Honourable Death are just direct swaps. They are going because we have desperate measures and commit the reserves, and you don't need them all. If you want the extra removal, you've still got the 3-cost order, whose name I can't remember. But realistically, you didn't need them. The rest of it, just some tweaks and changes, a lot of moving away from some of the more obvious OTK tools that could get silly. But that's about the extent of it. Let's have a look at what is coming back. Right, shock horror, Yamamoto is back. I'm laughing because this card and I have a storied history. Admiral Yamamoto was the very first gold elite that I got for Field Marshal, just in time for it to rotate the next season. So, there's a thing. I even made a suggestion post about seeing if they could do something about avoiding that being a possibility. Anyway, that's just a little bit of bare trivia. Yamamoto's coming back. It's unchanged. It is potentially, again, like Paton, in the right deck at the right time, very strong. +1 attack and blitz for all of your air units is not nothing for 1 credit if you're in a position to make use of it. There are a number of ways that you could make use of this, particularly we may see a lot more of Brit-Japan air, which I think is kind of intentional from some of the stuff that's arriving back. But anyway, Yamamoto's back, and I'm kind of glad to see him back, so I might actually get a chance to do some things. I never got a chance to actually try him out. J1N1 Gekko. This is... I don't know. I legitimately don't know what to say about this card, because this card is kind of chronically indifferent to me. Especially, and a little confusing in its return, given the current push away from orders. This card's sole saving quality is its text, which lets your orders deal +1 damage, which strengthens things like Diplomatic Attaché, and can combine with all the other aircraft that can do it. But it's expensive, it's slow, it's an indifferent body. Yeah, I don't know much, I don't know, let's reflect on the fact that it's a beautiful piece of art. I really don't, I'm ready to be proved wrong, but I'm not convinced that this is going to see a lot of play. Right, 61st Infantry Regiment. This is a very interesting return. So 61st is a decent guard with a good destruction effect. It's card draw for a nation that sometimes suffers for it. It's a guard in a nation that has a mixed history with guards. It's a decent body, but it has an annoyingly high operation cost. It's solid. It opens up the potential for Japan value decks, and might actually be a good pick in draft if for some reason you see it, because it's a decent infantry body, but it's very slow unless you have a way to reduce its op cost. Anyway, it's a card. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. It's basically more or less on value for its cost. Okay, now to a returning card getting a change which is going to be triggering for some people. This is Aichi, the Aichi D3A1, and this card is cracked. This card was cracked. Spoilers, very much like Monty, this card is still somewhat cracked. You may look at this card and look at me and think I've lost my mind. Because why is a slow, indifferent bomber slow because it has 2 op cost cracked? Because of its destruction effect. So what we need to do here is be aware of the existence of the card this spawns. So the Soviet equivalent of this is very much the same idea, but it's a fighter. When this Aichi explodes on the enemy's turn, you get a better bomber with smokescreen. Basically, it comes back but has extra attack, and the D3A2 gets +2 attack for each other Aichi D3A you control, which of course includes both D3A2s and the D3A, so it becomes a sort of mini tribal thing. We also have Audacity, which adds a D3A2 to your support line as an order, and there's also home defense. Anyway, there's a whole thing that you can do whereby these things can spiral out of control, and you can end up with some very nasty bombers on the board, many of which are 5-2s. The 2 is not great, but they're bombers, so they can ignore guard. But it is nerfed. I have to. There is a reason I'm keeping the text on the screen here, because the text on the screen here is telling, and I am going to give my opinions that I'm not convinced this will be the final version we will see. So it has been nerfed in that it now costs 3 instead of 2. However, it's also been buffed in that it has an operation cost of 1 instead of 2. So it's kind of not been so much nerfed as rebalanced, and I'm not convinced that a rebalance is as effective as a nerf. If this was 3 cost, 2 op cost, I might be more convinced. And I think that might be the final version we see, is that this comes back and it keeps the increase in deployment cost, but loses the decrease in operation cost. Anywho, what I will say is, regardless, because of the way the synergies work, and the fact that it is double bubble because it's a card that replaces itself with a better version of itself, which you can also already include 3 more of in your deck, makes it very good. Expect to see it around, unless it gets utterly destroyed in testing. But it is I note that they have literally said this is still in heavy testing. And I would not be at all surprised to see it see some further adjustments, because honestly, Aichi's very cracked. But it will be fun to see it back. We'll see some more Japan air decks, and that's like, I love my air decks, so I'm going to enjoy it. But yeah, there are people who will not be happy to see this coming back. Okay, so we wrap up with the minor nations, and we've kind of grouped them all together here, and the first thing we see is that there are 7 minor nation cards disappearing. Some of them are very unsurprising. Arming the Resistance going away is really not a shock. The days of resistance, as they say, have long since passed. Typo. Anyway, points for those who spot it. It'll go back, and we'll see. I do note that they say stay tuned next year, so now that all of the resistance is in the bounce pack, you expect resistance to come back in some form. Potes, of course, is going because it's key to mobilise, because they're rotating mobilise out. Sortie, yadata yadata yadata. Fulgura is going away because Alpine needed a nerf? I don't know. Napoli's going away. Like, honestly, I don't know why Fulgura is going away. 76th Napoli is going away because I assume no one played it? Yep, no idea. First of the Fight's going away again because, well, yeah, it wasn't seeing play. Hold the Line. Interesting removal that pin's gone as a countermeasure, but, you know, at 1 cost, it might be with Britain getting a minor pin focus. They don't want Brit-Poland to become too good with pins. Who knows? But anyway, these are the rotations going out. Right, there is only 1 card coming back from the minor nations, and it's the Bloch MB152. Bloch MB 152. I really don't understand. I don't. If this is coming back, I don't understand why. Just to be clear, we're getting rid of mobilize, so I don't know whether this is coming back or whether this is just here or whether this is rotating out. I do not know. This is in the reserved pool, I believe. Yep. I was just checking. This is in the reserved pool. If it's coming back, I don't know why, because you're getting rid of mobilize. So it's a terrible fighter with heavy armor. No idea. Absolutely clueless, really. I'm ending this discussion on a confused face. I've got no idea. Okay, so we are back to wrap up with my final thoughts. Interesting rotations. My comments will be borne out or not. Hopefully you found it an interesting delve into it. Stay tuned, there will be more coming with regards to the new content and the expansion in general. I'm going to be trying to keep on top of it all the way down, so you please like, subscribe, all of that. Catch me on Twitch. I generally stream Tuesdays and Saturdays at 17:30 UK time. Feel free to come join me there too. Join my Discord, link down below. Have a look, please, and see if you can, buy me a coffee / drop some support money. That's always welcome too, because this, the equipment for making this and the time to make this is not as free as I would like it to be. But as ever, I've had a good time going through this. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you find it useful. As always, stay well, be good human beings, and I will catch you next time.